Hello. Thank you for your interest in learning about our experiences with creating accessibility in new student transition programming for international students. Themes from this content are common across four-year higher education institutions in North America, but I would like to preface that the content was built specifically based on my experiences at the University of Waterloo in Canada, as well as those of my colleague Lizette at Virginia Tech in the United States. Outside of our roles at our respective institutions, Lizette and I are also members of the NOTA leadership team. NOTA is an association for practitioners, scholars, and students who work in higher education in orientation, transition, and retention programming. While folks who work in new student transition are constantly assessing and evaluating current plans, the pandemic certainly caused us to face challenges that we've never had to face before. We found ourselves often thinking questions like, how do we make our students feel like they belong when they can't be here? Or how do we give them the tools that they need to succeed from wherever they are? So the need for new students to feel a connection to the campus community has always been a forethought when creating a new student transition model. We see better retention when students feel a sense of belonging and find that students understand how and where to access resources when they're needed. We can see how helping new international students builds that connection in advance, and building that connection in advance will make them feel like they're more welcome, more comfortable, and interested in their surroundings when they arrive to campus in the future. It was also important to ensure that all elements of new student transition programming that are integral to the academic success of a student were fully accessible. This meant finding engaging ways to create synchronous content that a student could access at their leisure. I'd like to share some of the highlights of the programming that was offered at my institution at the University of Waterloo and at Lizette's at Virginia Tech. We'll also follow up, obviously, with some lessons learned. Whenever we do something new, you also have to learn about what you did and take what you have learned into the future. So one of the big items for us was helping students feel like they were connected to not just the sense of being a student at our school, but also the actual people at the school. Being on your own wherever you are with your family there, but your family doesn't always have a sense of what it's like to be a student at your school. And so helping them make those connections was integral. In an attempt to help those new international students feel more part of the community, we actively facilitated bonding activities with upper year students, staff, and faculty. A couple of examples of this was email campaigns prior to the start of classes that allowed for new students to build connections with their upper year mentors. And then once classes did start and sort of throughout their first year, we also had pen pal programs that were initiated in the fall term and carried on to help maintain connections for students who were studying from their home country. Similarly, we had students who had arrived on campus and stayed in residence halls during the holiday break, and that allowed them an opportunity to communicate back with students like them to their home countries who they might not have ever met, but they could at least maintain some sort of a connection and feel like, for both sets of students, feel like they were part of something else. Some of the events and programming, all of the events and programming, were designed as either live or synchronous, depending on the purpose of the event and the opportunities for connections with others. So as an example, when we needed a university official to address a topic integral to a student's academic success, we would consider if the session could be recorded in advance for their leisure, or for students and their families to watch at their leisure, and then schedule a live question and answer period for audience members who had follow-up questions. We also offered a form that was included after an asynchronous programming session to help gauge a student's learning, which would help us understand if topics needed to be revisited to ensure that academic success we identify as so crucial through new student transition programming. Students who are planning to come to campus, either right away or eventually, were provided advice on what the institution was doing to meet public health guidelines regarding COVID-19 and the pandemic. And we're also provided with information about quarantine support available depending on the local requirements for their destination. Understanding the local culture, especially in preparation for their eventual arrival, is an important element of new student transition and helping them feel welcome. And so to accommodate this from afar, some ideas that were brought up and executed were special programs around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which supported learning related to the North American culture and more specifically to the campus culture. Special programming was also created by the various campuses' international offices to facilitate connections with others on campus and get them excited for a time when they could make those connections in person on campus. This was also seen as a means to support retention of these international students through year one. So as I mentioned, we obviously have some takeaways and lessons learned from the changes that we've made. We certainly encountered some surprises along the way and even had a great opportunity to explore how things could be even beyond the needs related to the pandemic. And some of the highlights from this include scheduling. So we found that while significant work was done to create new student transition schedules that best accommodated a student's local time zone, we found that many students were actually preparing for a transition to the time zone the institution is located in. Many had been able to identify on their own that being able to participate in synchronous academic and social activities would help them build the community that they desired to have. We also found engagement of international students to be higher during programming scheduled at the beginning of the day. So although I guess I should mention that other variables may have been at play, including that morning programming was typically related to academic preparedness, whereas evening programming was often more oriented to social connections. So it's possible that students were prioritizing those morning programming pieces to ensure that they were ready for their academic well-being and recognize that they could make those social connections later. We found that certain types of equity and diversity programming were more challenging to facilitate as we didn't know if our audience members were in a safe space. So we had to be conscious of who else may be watching, watching such presentations with the student, and the customs and practices of the student's home country and how they may conflict with the equity and diversity dialogues we were having with our students. Overall, we were pleased to see that even in a virtual setting, our new international students were able to make that important connection to campus and learn about how to be successful in their academic career. As challenging as creating such a program may have seemed for us early on, the successes have also created ideas that can be integrated into our overall new student transition experience for international students in future years. I'd like to thank you again for your interest in learning about our new student transition programming changes for international students. Lizette and I are excited to see you and to answer any questions that you may have.